The thunderous crack of the gavel echoed through the crowded town hall of McGill, Nevada, sealing Felicity Warren's fate as surely as the chains that had once bound her wrists. The year was 1875, and her father's gambling debts had finally caught up to their family in the most horrific way imaginable. Sold. "To the gentleman in the back for $200, announced the auctioneer. A thin man with cold eyes who'd shown no mercy as he'd rattled off Felicity's supposed qualities like she was nothing more than a prized mare. Young woman, healthy, educated, suitable for housekeeping and other domestic duties. Felicity stood on the makeshift platform, her face burning with humiliation as she stared at the worn floorboards. She could feel dozens of eyes boring into her, some pitying, others calculating her worth in ways that made her stomach turn. The fine blue dress she wore, once her Sunday best, now felt like a costume in some cruel theatrical performance where she'd been cast without consent. The crowd began to disperse, men returning to their whiskey at the saloon, women gathering to whisper about the spectacle they'd just witnessed. Debt auctions weren't uncommon in frontier towns like McGill, but they were usually reserved for farmhands and ranch workers, not 22-year-old daughters of once respected merchants. Through tear-blurred vision, Felicity finally raised her eyes to see who had purchased her contract, 3 years of servitude to pay off her father's $5,000 debt to the bank. All that remained was $200 after their modest home and store had been liquidated, and now she would work off the rest. The man who approached the platform wore no expression at all, his face weathered by sun and wind into something unreadable. He was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a dust-covered denim coat with a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "Miss Warren," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "Xavier Thornton. I own the Double T Ranch about 10 miles outside of town." Felicity fought to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Thornton, you'll have a private room in my home. I need someone to cook, clean, and help manage the household accounts." His eyes, she noticed, were a striking blue that contrasted with his sun-darkened skin. "My foreman will escort you to collect your belongings." A broad-shouldered Mexican man stepped forward with a respectful nod. "Miguel Hernandez, Señorita. My wagon is ready whenever you are." The next hour passed in a blur as Felicity gathered what little remained of her possessions from the small room behind her father's former store. Just 3 months ago, her father had still been alive, still been promising that his next venture would solve all their problems. Then pneumonia had taken him in less than a week, and the vultures had descended immediately. "I'm sorry about your father," Miguel said as he helped load her single trunk into the wagon. "Mr. Thornton, he is a fair man, not like some others in this territory." Felicity couldn't bring herself to respond. Fair or not, she had been sold like property to pay a dead man's debts. Her entire future had been reduced to a transaction that took less than 5 minutes to complete. The Double T Ranch sprawled across a wide valley nestled between rocky hills. Its main house, a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy timber and stone. As they approached, Felicity counted at least 8 smaller cabins, 2 large barns, and numerous corrals filled with horses. This was no modest operation. Xavier Thornton was clearly a man of considerable means. "Mr. Thornton is still in town handling business," Miguel explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "Mrs. Hernandez, my wife, Alina, she will show you to your room and explain your duties." Alina Hernandez was a kind-faced woman in her 40s who greeted Felicity with genuine warmth. "Come, child, you must be exhausted." The room was simple but comfortable, a narrow bed with a clean quilt, a small dresser, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a window that overlooked the eastern pastures. It was far better than Felicity had dared to hope for, which somehow made the situation even more painful. Charity dressed up as fair employment felt worse than outright cruelty. "Dinner is at 6, Alina said. "Rest now. Tomorrow is soon enough to start your work." Left alone, Felicity finally allowed herself to weep, muffling her sobs in the unfamiliar pillow. Her education, her dreams of perhaps becoming a teacher or a shopkeeper in her own right, all of it seemed like foolish fantasy now. She was property, purchased at auction by a man who hadn't even bothered to ask if she could cook before bidding on her. The sound of hoofbeats outside her window roused her from fitful sleep some time later. Twilight had fallen, and as she peered outside, she saw Xavier Thornton dismounting from a magnificent black stallion. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to commanding respect, pausing to speak with several ranch hands before disappearing into the house. Dinner was a quiet affair in the spacious kitchen. Felicity sat stiffly at the large wooden table alongside the ranch cook, a cheerful older man named Howard, and two young cowboys, whose names she immediately forgot. Xavier Thornton did not join them. "Boss usually eats in his study when he's got paperwork," Howard explained when he noticed her glancing at the empty chair at the head of the table. "Don't take it personal." The next morning, Felicity rose at dawn, determined to at least maintain her dignity through hard work. Alina showed her the routines of the house: laundry on Mondays, baking on Tuesdays, general cleaning throughout the week. The house was large but well organized, and the work, while constant, wasn't overwhelming. "Mr. Thornton has papers that need organizing in his study," Alina said after lunch. "He asked specifically for your help with that. Your father taught you figures, yes?" Felicity nodded. "He insisted I learn bookkeeping for the store." Xavier's study was lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive oak desk covered in neat stacks of papers. The room smelled of leather, paper, and the faint scent of tobacco. The man himself sat behind the desk, looking up as she entered. "Miss Warren." He gestured to a chair across from him. "I understand you have experience with accounts." "I do, Mr. Thornton." She remained standing, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. He studied her for a moment, then slid a ledger across the desk. "The cattle accounts are a mess. Previous housekeeper couldn't tell a debit from a credit. I'd appreciate your assessment." For the next 2 hours, Felicity lost herself in columns of numbers and inventory lists. The work was familiar, almost comforting in its logical progression. Xavier watched her occasionally, asking pointed questions about discrepancies she found, nodding at her observations. "You have a good eye," he said finally, "better than mine for these details. My father always said numbers tell stories if you know how to read them." The mention of her father brought a fresh wave of grief, and she swallowed hard. "I'm sorry about James," Xavier said quietly. "He was a good man who made poor choices." Surprised, Felicity looked up. "You knew my father. This is a small territory, Miss Warren. Most folks doing business know each other. I bought supplies from your father's store many times." The knowledge that he had known her father, had perhaps watched her family's gradual decline, made her cheeks burn with shame. Had he attended the auction specifically to acquire her services, knowing her skills beforehand? Days turned into weeks as Felicity settled into a routine at the Double T. The work was hard but fair, and she found unexpected satisfaction in bringing order to the chaotic household accounts. Xavier was often absent during the days, riding out with his men to manage the vast cattle operation, but evenings frequently found them both in his study, working side by side on the ranch's paperwork. She learned pieces of him gradually: that he was 32, had built the ranch from almost nothing over the past decade, that he preferred coffee black and strong, that he read Shakespeare by lamplight when he thought everyone was asleep. He was unfailingly polite, scrupulously correct in his dealings with her, and maintained a careful distance that both relieved and, inexplicably, disappointed her. Spring was advancing into early summer when disaster struck. Felicity was hanging laundry when she heard the commotion, men shouting, horses galloping into the yard. Xavier was being carried between two ranch hands, his face ashen, blood soaking his left pant leg. "Stampede," Miguel explained tersely as they carried him into the house. "Bull gored him trying to protect a calf." The doctor was sent for immediately, but McGill was hours away. Felicity found herself thrust into the role of nurse, following Alina's calm instructions as they cut away the blood-soaked denim to reveal a deep puncture wound in Xavier's thigh. "Need to clean it before infection sets in," Alina muttered, heating water on the stove. "Señorita, hold him down. This will hurt." Xavier remained conscious through the ordeal, his jaw clenched tight, only a hiss of pain escaping when Alina poured whiskey directly into the wound. His eyes found Felicity's as she pressed her weight against his shoulders, holding him still some. "Introduction to ranching," he managed through gritted teeth. "Quiet," she scolded automatically, then bit her lip, remembering her position. But he only laughed, a short, pained sound. "Yes, madam." The doctor arrived near midnight, pronounced the initial treatment adequate, and stitched the wound properly. "Bed rest for at least a week," he instructed sternly. "That bull came dangerously close to the femoral artery. You're lucky to still have a leg, Thornton." Xavier proved to be a terrible patient, attempting to get out of bed the very next day. Felicity found him swaying dangerously in the hallway, white-faced and sweating. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, rushing to support him before he collapsed. "Checking on the herd," he muttered. "Miguel will need. Miguel has managed this ranch many times when you've gone to Denver on business," she interrupted, guiding him back to his bedroom. "He doesn't need you bleeding all over the place and creating more work for everyone." Surprisingly, he allowed himself to be led back to bed without further argument. As she helped him settle against the pillows, she became acutely aware of his state of undress, just a nightshirt and bandages, and the impropriety of her being alone in his bedroom. Yet somehow, the normal rules seemed suspended in the face of his injury. "You're not what I expected, Felicity Warren," he said quietly as she adjusted his blankets. It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. "And what did you expect, Mr. Thornton? Someone broken by circumstance?" His blue eyes held hers. "Instead, I find someone who seems to grow stronger with every challenge." She looked away, uncomfortable with his praise. "Necessity, not strength. We adapt because we must. Not everyone does. Many break instead." His hand caught hers as she turned to leave. "Thank you." For the next week, Felicity found herself serving as Xavier's primary caretaker. Alina had her hands full managing the household, while also caring for one of the ranch hands who'd sustained a broken arm in the same incident. The forced proximity created an odd intimacy, Felicity bringing Xavier his meals, helping change his bandages, reading to him in the evenings when restlessness made him irritable. She discovered he had a keen mind for poetry, could debate politics with remarkable insight, and possessed a dry humor that emerged more frequently as he became comfortable with her presence. The careful employer-employee boundary began to blur in ways that both exhilarated and terrified her. "Tell me about your dreams," he asked one evening as she changed his bandages. Before all this happened, what did Felicity Warren want from life? She focused on the task at hand, carefully applying the salve the doctor had left. "It doesn't matter now. It matters to me." Looking up, she found his expression unexpectedly vulnerable. "I wanted to open a small school," she admitted. "I've always loved teaching children. My father encouraged it, said I had a gift for explanation." "You do," Xavier agreed. "I've seen how you work with Miguel's youngest when she comes to the house. You're patient, thorough. Dreams require money and freedom, Mr. Thornton. I currently possess neither." She secured the fresh bandage and stood. "You're healing well. The doctor will be pleased." His hand caught hers again, gentle but insistent. "Xavier. When we're alone, at least, I wish you would call me Xavier." Something shifted between them that night, a subtle realignment that Felicity couldn't quite name but felt in every subsequent interaction. Xavier began taking his meals in the dining room again, once he could walk with a cane, engaging her in conversation that ranged far beyond household matters. He sought her opinion on books, asked about her childhood in California before her family moved to Nevada, shared stories of his own youth in Missouri. The rest of the household noticed. Felicity caught Alina watching them with knowing eyes, saw the speculative glances exchanged by the ranch hands when Xavier lingered over breakfast to discuss the day's tasks with her rather than Miguel. "Be careful, Nina," Alina warned one afternoon as they kneaded bread together. "The boss is a good man, but you are in a vulnerable position." "Nothing improper has happened," Felicity protested, her cheeks warming. "It is not what has happened that concerns me, but what might." Alina's hands never stopped their rhythmic work on the dough. "Men of power sometimes forget the imbalance between themselves and those dependent on them." "He's not like that," Felicity said, then immediately regretted the defensive tone in her voice. Alina's knowing smile said everything her words didn't. By midsummer, Xavier had fully recovered, returning to his daily routine of managing the ranch. Yet he continued to invite Felicity to work alongside him in the evenings, their conversations stretching later into the night. She told herself it was merely his appreciation for her organizational skills, her neat handwriting in the ledgers, her memory for details, but she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest when he smiled at her across the desk. It was during one such evening that disaster struck again, this time in the form of Bartholomew Jenkins, the banker who held her contract. The knock on the study door came after 9, unusual for the ranch where most retired early. Miguel's voice was tight with tension when Xavier called for him to enter. "Mr. Jenkins from the McGill Bank is here, boss. Says it can't wait till morning." Xavier frowned, glancing at Felicity. "Show him in." Jenkins was a florid man with small, calculating eyes and a perpetual sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He nodded curtly to Xavier, then fixed his gaze on Felicity with an expression that made her skin crawl. "Miss Warren, you look well. Country air agrees with you." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Thornton, I apologize for the late hour, but I've come on a matter of some urgency regarding Miss Warren's contract." Xavier's expression remained neutral. "What about it?" Jenkins pulled a document from his inside pocket. "There appears to have been a miscalculation in the final accounting of James Warren's debts. With interest properly calculated, the outstanding amount is significantly higher than originally assessed." Felicity felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible." "My father kept meticulous records." "Records that conveniently disappeared when the store was liquidated," Jenkins countered smoothly. "The bank's calculations stand. The 3-year term of service is insufficient to cover the debt." "How much more?" Xavier asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "An additional 2 years would satisfy the obligation." Jenkins didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. "Unless, of course, someone wished to purchase the contract outright. The balance stands at $3,000. The sum was astronomical, more than most ranch hands made in 5 years. Felicity's hands began to tremble in her lap. 5 years of servitude instead of 3. By then, she would be 27, her youth spent in paying for her father's mistakes. "That's convenient timing, Jenkins," Xavier said coldly. "Waiting until Miss Warren has proven her value before suddenly discovering this discrepancy." Jenkins shrugged, unperturbed. "Business is business, Thornton. If you're satisfied with her services, you're welcome to renegotiate the contract. Otherwise, I have several other interested parties who would gladly take over the remaining obligation." Felicity fought against the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. The thought of being transferred to another household, perhaps to someone who'd looked at her with predatory eyes during the auction, made her physically ill. "I'll need to review the figures," Xavier said after a tense silence. "Leave the documentation. I'll come to the bank tomorrow with my decision." After Jenkins departed, the study remained silent save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Felicity stared at her hands, unable to meet Xavier's eyes, shame and fear warring within her. "He's lying," she finally whispered. "My father was many things, but he kept perfect books. Jenkins is inventing debt. I know." Xavier's voice was tight with anger. "It's a common enough scheme. Banks inflate debts after contracts are signed, especially for those without means to fight back legally." She finally looked up, finding his expression thunderous. "What will you do?" "What would you like me to do, Felicity?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her wishes since before her father's death. I don't want to be transferred. Beyond that." She shook her head helplessly. Xavier studied her for a long moment, then nodded once decisively. "Get some rest. I'll handle Jenkins tomorrow." Felicity barely slept that night, her mind spinning with terrible possibilities. By morning, dark circles shadowed her eyes as she mechanically went through her duties. Xavier had ridden out at dawn, impeccably dressed in his best suit, expression grim and determined. He didn't return until late afternoon. Felicity was in the kitchen garden, half-heartedly weeding between rows of carrots, when she heard his horse approaching. She stood, brushing soil from her hands, steeling herself for whatever news he might bring. Xavier dismounted with fluid grace, handing the reins to a waiting stable boy. When he saw Felicity, he changed direction to walk directly toward her, his face unreadable. "Mr. Thornton," she greeted him, her voice barely steady. "You've seen Mr. Jenkins." "I have." He glanced around at the other workers within earshot. "Walk with me." They moved in silence toward the small apple orchard that bordered the kitchen garden, far enough from the house for privacy. Felicity's heart hammered against her ribs, her mind racing through possibilities. Was she to be sent away? Had Xavier refused to pay the additional amount? Had some new, even more terrible arrangement been made? When they reached the shade of the apple trees, Xavier stopped and turned to face her. "Jenkins is a crook, but a well-protected one. Fighting him directly would be difficult." Felicity nodded, throat too tight for words. "I examined your father's original debt documents. Jenkins falsified the interest rates after the fact, but proving that in court would take months, if it could be proven at all." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "So I made a different arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" she managed to ask. Xavier reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. With deliberate movements, he untied the drawstring and appended the contents into his palm. A gold ring gleamed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the apple, leaves a simple band set with a small, perfect diamond. Felicity stared at it uncomprehending, then looked up to find Xavier watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I bought your contract," he said quietly. Paid it in full with witnesses and signed documentation. You're no longer indentured to anyone, Felicity. You're free." The relief that flooded through her was so powerful that her knees nearly buckled. "I thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay. I'm not finished." Xavier took a step closer. "I have a proposition for you, but I need you to understand something first. You owe me nothing. If you choose to leave the Double T today, you'll go with my blessing and enough money to establish yourself wherever you wish." Confusion replaced relief. "I don't understand." Xavier took a deep breath. "These past months, working beside you, talking with you, watching your courage in the face of circumstances that would have broken lesser souls, I've come to care for you, Felicity. More than I should, perhaps, given our situation." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Mr. Thornton, Xavier," he corrected gently. "And please, let me finish before I lose my nerve entirely." She nodded, speechless. "What I'm trying to say, very badly, is that I would like to court you properly. Not as your employer, not as the holder of your contract, but as a man who admires and respects a remarkable woman." He held out the ring. "This was my mother's. I'm not offering it to you today. That would be presumptuous beyond measure. I'm merely showing you that my intentions are honorable and serious." Felicity stared at the ring, then at Xavier's face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found only nervous sincerity in his blue eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you're the first person in years who sees me as more than the owner of the Double T. Because you challenge me without fear. Because your mind fascinates me and your courage humbles me." His smile was self-deprecating. "Because when I was laid up with that bull wound, I realized I'd rather talk with you than anyone else I've ever known." A strange warmth bloomed in Felicity's chest, fragile and frightening in its intensity. "I'm nobody," she said. "A merchant's daughter with nothing to her name." "You're Felicity Warren," Xavier corrected firmly. "And you are most certainly not nobody." The summer breeze stirred the apple leaves above them, dappling sunlight across their faces. In that moment, Felicity saw the choice before her with perfect clarity: to reject this unexpected gift out of pride or fear, or to accept the possibility it offered, however uncertain. "I would like to stay at the Double T," she said finally. "As an employee, paid fair wages for my work." Something like disappointment flickered across Xavier's face before he controlled it. "Of course. I'll have Miguel prepare a proper employment contract, and," she interrupted, summoning her courage, "I would not be opposed to being courted properly, with appropriate chaperonage and boundaries." The smile that transformed his face made him look years younger. "I would be honored." What followed was perhaps the strangest courtship in Nevada territory. Xavier insisted on doing everything with impeccable propriety: formal dinners, with the Hernandezes present as chaperones, chaperoned rides across the ranch property, carefully supervised visits to town for church services and occasional social gatherings. To Felicity's surprise, the residents of McGill accepted the situation with minimal gossip. Perhaps it was Xavier's respected position, or perhaps frontier communities simply had better things to worry about than the romantic affairs of ranchers. Either way, she gradually relaxed into the new role of a woman being properly courted rather than a servant in the household. Elena helped her alter some of her plain work dresses into more suitable attire for their outings, adding lace collars and fresh ribbons. Xavier presented her with fabric for a new dress, a deep blue that matched his eyes, insisting it was a birthday gift rather than charity when she initially protested. Their conversations deepened as the formal barriers between them dissolved. Xavier spoke of his father's death when he was just 16, the struggle to save the family's small Missouri farm, his decision to sell and strike out west with his inheritance. Felicity shared stories of her mother, who had died when she was 12, of her father's genuine love and catastrophic financial decisions, of her own dreams and fears. Autumn painted the Nevada landscape in subtle golds and russets as cattle were rounded up for market. Xavier spent long days in the saddle, returning exhausted but always finding energy to spend an hour with Felicity in the evenings, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence on the porch as the stars emerged above the mountains. "Would you consider teaching here on the ranch?" he asked one such evening. "We have at least 15 children among the ranch hands' families, with no proper schooling available." Felicity turned to him in surprise. "You'd establish a school. The old storage building by the east pasture could be converted easily enough. It would need proper windows, a stove for winter." He spoke casually, as if suggesting a minor improvement to the property rather than fulfilling her dearest wish. "Xavier." She touched his arm, stopping his practical planning. "Why would you do this?" In the fading light, his expression was tender. "Because it would make you happy. Because those children deserve education. Because you have a gift that shouldn't be wasted." She had no words to respond, overwhelmed by the simple generosity of the gesture. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek, their first physical contact beyond the occasional hand holding during their walks. Xavier went very still, his eyes widening slightly. Then he smiled, the corner of his mouth turning up in a way that made her heart skip. "I should propose school buildings more often." The school became reality with remarkable speed. Ranch hands worked through October to install proper windows and a sturdy door, build desks and benches, construct a blackboard from carefully smoothed and painted wood. By November, 15 children ranging from 6 to 14 gathered each morning in the converted building, with Felicity presiding over their education with growing confidence. Xavier made a point of visiting weekly, ostensibly to check on the building's condition but transparently to watch Felicity in her element. The children adored him, especially when he began bringing books for their small library adventure stories, atlases, even a set of encyclopedias ordered specially from San Francisco. As winter approached, bringing occasional snow to the high desert, the rhythm of ranch life slowed. Evenings lengthened, offering more time for Xavier and Felicity to spend together. They read aloud to each other beside the fireplace, played chess, which Felicity consistently won, and talked endlessly about everything and nothing. It was during one such evening, with December winds howling outside the snug ranch house, that Xavier finally broached the subject they'd been dancing around for months. "Christmas is approaching," he said, moving his knight across the chessboard between them. "The ranch always holds a celebration for all the families." "Elena mentioned it," Felicity replied, studying the board with narrowed eyes. "She's already planning the feast." "I was thinking." He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "That is, I wondered if you might permit me to make a formal announcement at the gathering." Her hand froze above her bishop. "What kind of announcement?" Xavier met her gaze steadily. "An engagement, if you would do me the honor of accepting my proposal." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant moan of the wind. Felicity's mind raced not with doubt about her feelings, which had grown beyond question over the past months, but with a nagging sense of unworthiness that she couldn't quite shake. "The people of McGill still remember the auction," she said finally, voicing the fear that had lingered despite everything. "They remember watching me stand on that platform while men bid on my contract. Is that really who you want as your wife? Someone tainted by such public humiliation?" Xavier's expression darkened. "Anyone who would think less of you for circumstances beyond your control isn't worth considering." He reached across the chessboard, scattering pieces as he took her hands in his. "But if it's my opinion you're worried about, let me be absolutely clear. I see only strength, dignity, and remarkable grace in how you faced adversity." Tears pricked behind her eyes. "You could have any woman in the territory, daughters of successful ranchers, women with dowries and social connections." "I don't want any woman in the territory," Xavier said simply. "I want you, Felicity Warren. Only you." The next morning, Felicity woke to find McGill blanketed in unexpected early snow, transforming the rugged landscape into something magical. Xavier had already ridden out to check on cattle in the north pasture, leaving her to help Alina with preparations for the Sunday dinner. "He asked me to marry him," Felicity confessed, as they kneaded bread dough side by side. Alina's hands never faltered in their rhythmic work. "And what did you say, Nina? I haven't given him an answer yet." Felicity concentrated on the dough beneath her fingers. "I'm afraid." "Of Xavier?" Alina looked genuinely surprised. "No, never of him, of not being enough, of people whispering about his choice." She sighed. "Of failing him somehow." Alina wiped her hands on her apron and gently turned Felicity to face her. "Listen to me. I have worked for Xavier Thornton for 8 years. In that time, I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, like you hung the moon and stars yourself. He is a good man who knows his own mind." She patted Felicity's cheek. "And you, my dear, are more than enough. You always have been." The Christmas celebration was scheduled for the weekend before the actual holiday, allowing some ranch hands to travel to visit distant relatives. By mid-afternoon on the appointed day, the main house was filled with delicious smells and the sound of children's excited voices. Tables had been set up in the cleared central room, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons. Felicity wore her blue dress, her hair carefully arranged with the tortoiseshell combs that had been her mother's. As she helped Alina arrange platters of food on the long tables, she couldn't help glancing toward the door whenever it opened, looking for Xavier. He had been mysteriously absent most of the day, riding out early with Miguel on some unspecified errand. When he finally appeared, the celebration was already in full swing, ranch families filling the house with laughter and conversation. Felicity's breath caught when she saw him. Xavier had clearly made an effort with his appearance, his dark hair neatly combed, beard trimmed, wearing a new shirt she hadn't seen before under his best waistcoat. He scanned the room until his eyes found hers, his smile immediate and warming. As he made his way toward her, Felicity noticed he carried something in his hand, a small wooden box, simply made but beautifully polished. The conversation around them seemed to dim as he reached her, standing before her with an expression of such earnest hope that it made her heart ache. "I have something for you," he said quietly, though in the sudden hush that had fallen over the gathering, his words carried clearly. "Something I should have done properly the first time." With deliberate movements, he placed the small wooden box on the table beside them, then opened the lid to reveal the diamond ring she had seen months before in the apple orchard. Around them, the ranch hands and their families watched with undisguised interest, smiles breaking out on many faces. "Mine," Xavier said simply, his eyes never leaving hers. "If you'll have me." In that moment, all Felicity's doubts and fears seemed to fall away. This man, this good, honorable, stubborn man, saw her clearly and wanted her anyway. Not as property, not as an obligation, but as a partner. An equal. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Yes, I'll have you." The cheer that went up from the gathered ranch families nearly raised the roof beams. Xavier's hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips in a gesture of such tender reverence that tears sprang to her eyes. "I love you," "Felicity Warren," he said, just loudly enough for her to hear over the celebration erupting around them. "I think I have since you told me off for trying to get out of bed after that bull got me." She laughed through her tears. "I love you too, Xavier Thornton, even when you're being stubborn." "Especially when I'm being stubborn," he corrected, grinning, before pulling her into a proper kiss that set the gathering to cheering even louder. The wedding took place in early spring, when the Nevada desert erupted in a brief, spectacular bloom of wildflowers. The entire town of McGill turned out for the celebration, held on the double T under a canopy of fresh leaves in the apple orchard, where Xavier had first shown her his mother's ring. Felicity wore a gown of cream-colored silk that Alina had helped her make, with tiny pearl buttons down the back and lace at the collar and cuffs. Xavier looked handsome and slightly overwhelmed in his new suit, his eyes never leaving her as she walked toward him on Miguel's arm. The banker Jenkins was conspicuously absent from the celebration, having left McGill under somewhat mysterious circumstances a month after Xavier had paid off Felicity's contract. Rumors suggested financial irregularities had been discovered in his accounts irregularities that somehow came to the attention of his superiors in Carson City. No one at the Double T seemed particularly troubled by his departure. As Felicity and Xavier exchanged their vows beneath the apple blossoms, she marveled at the twisting path that had led her here from the humiliation of the auction block to this moment of perfect joy. When the circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tender passion that several of the ranch hands hooted appreciatively. The celebration continued well into the night, with music and dancing under lantern light. As the evening cooled, Xavier led Felicity away from the festivities toward the main house, their home now, in every sense. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, testing the name as they walked hand in hand. "I like the sound of that." "As do I, Mr. Thornton." She squeezed his hand. "Though I may keep Warren for my teaching, the children are used to Miss Warren. Whatever makes you happy." He stopped at the porch steps, turning to face her in the silver moonlight. "That's all I want, you know, for you to be happy here with me." Felicity reached up to touch his face, marveling that she could do so freely now. "I am happy. Happier than I ever thought possible after the auction," he finished for her, his expression sobering. "I watched you that day, you know, standing so straight and proud despite everything. I knew then that you were extraordinary. Is that why you bid on my contract?" She had never asked directly before. "Partly," Xavier admitted, "but also because I needed help with those blasted account books, and everyone in town knew James Warren's daughter was brilliant with figures." His smile turned wry. "I had no idea I was bidding on my future wife, and I had no idea the stern, silent rancher who bought my contract would become the man I love beyond reason." She stood on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "Life takes unexpected turns. Indeed it does." He swept her into his arms suddenly, making her laugh in surprise as he carried her up the porch steps. "And this particular turn leads directly to our bedroom, Mrs. Thornton." The years that followed brought changes to the Double T that few could have predicted. The small school Felicity had started grew steadily, eventually expanding into a proper building in McGill itself, with Felicity overseeing a small staff of teachers. Her reputation as an educator spread throughout the territory, bringing recognition and respect far beyond her role as Xavier Thornton's wife. Xavier himself continued to build the ranch into one of the most successful operations in eastern Nevada, incorporating progressive methods that improved both productivity and the welfare of his workers. Together, they established a foundation to provide educational opportunities for children of limited means, ensuring that no child in their corner of Nevada would be denied learning due to financial circumstances. Their family grew as well. Their first child, a son they named James Michael after both their fathers, arrived just over a year after their wedding. A daughter, Sarah Elena, followed 18 months later, and another son, William Howard, 2 years after that. The children grew up surrounded by books and horses, equally at home in the schoolroom and on the range. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Felicity with a special gift, the deed to her father's old store in McGill, which had stood vacant since his death. He had purchased it secretly and renovated the space into a proper bookshop, fulfilling another of Felicity's long-held dreams. "For the teacher who needs more books than even I can order from San Francisco," he explained as he handed her the keys. "Stock it as you wish. Make it a place where minds can grow." The bookshop, which Felicity named simply Warren's, became a centerpiece of McGill's growing community, hosting reading circles, educational lectures, and community meetings. The town itself was changing, becoming less of a rough frontier outpost and more of an established community, with families putting down roots and building for the future. 10 years to the day after the auction that had so changed her life, Felicity stood in the doorway of their home watching Xavier teaching their youngest son to ride his first pony. The sight of his patient hands guiding the boy, the same careful attention he gave to everything he valued, filled her heart to overflowing. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing, watching stars emerge above the familiar landscape of the Double T. "Do you ever think about it?" Xavier asked quietly. "The auction. What might have happened if I hadn't been there that day?" Felicity considered the question, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. "Sometimes. Not with fear anymore, but with a sort of wonder at how lives can pivot on single moments." She took his hand, running her thumb over the plain gold band he wore. "I might have ended up anywhere with anyone, or with no one," he said softly. "Alone. Instead, I ended up exactly where I was meant to be." She lifted her face for his kiss, still feeling after all these years the same thrill when his lips met hers. "With you, with our children, with this life we've built together." Xavier's arms tightened around her. "When I placed that ring on the table at the Christmas celebration and said mine, I was the one who didn't understand. I thought I was claiming you, but the truth is, I was offering myself. I became yours in that moment, Felicity, completely and forever yours." The stars wheeled slowly overhead, marking the passage of time in their ancient dance. On the Double T Ranch, a family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that sometimes, even from the darkest circumstances, the most beautiful futures can emerge unexpected, unplanned, but ultimately perfect in their own unique way. For Felicity Thornton, née Warren, the journey from auction block to beloved wife, mother, teacher, and respected community member was more than a personal triumph. It was proof that worth could not be measured in dollars or bids, that dignity could survive humiliation, and that love, when genuine and respectful, could heal even the deepest wounds. And for Xavier Thornton, the man who had once purchased a woman's contract only to discover he was actually freeing his own heart, the lesson was equally profound. True ownership had nothing to do with legal documents or financial transactions. It existed only in the willing gift of oneself to another, offered freely and accepted with gratitude. Together, they had rewritten what could have been a story of servitude into one of partnership, turning mine from a statement of possession into a promise of belonging that would last their lifetimes and beyond.